Hey guys, welcome back to History with Mrs. Lee. Today we are going to be looking at some of the innovations and inventions that were part of the Industrial Revolution of the 1800s. And the way that we remember some of these important innovations is fruits CPR. We see fruits of labor in the north, and we see inventions that revived the agriculture in the south with CPR. Okay, so let's start with F in fruits, and that is F is for factories. The factory system was brought over by Samuel Slater. He had seen this in Europe, and he thought that America could benefit from the factory system. This would be like placing things like the spinning jenny or the power loom inside of just one building and doing all steps of creating things like bolts of fabric or creating different manufactured goods in just one place. Now, it's important to note that factories were placed along bodies of water like rivers and canals. And speaking of canals, we learned about the Erie Canal that was built in New York, and it connected Lake Erie to New York City and down to the Hudson River, which then takes you out to the Atlantic Ocean. And canals were built mostly by Irish immigrants, and these canals helped improve the transportation, but they also encouraged more people to move closer to the canals, and so we saw a boom of cities along the canals. Okay? Excuse me. Now, R stands for railroads, and this is going to be an important innovation for transportation. I told you guys, though, railroads and trains are not always going to be called trains. They're going to sometimes be called steam locomotives. And railroads were important to us because they helped connect the east to the west and created faster and cheaper transportation. Railroads would rely on the invention of the Bessemer steel process, which was a way to mass produce steel to build railroads and buildings at a cheaper and more efficient price. The U in fruits stands for urbanization. We saw the majority of urban areas pop up in the north because of the job opportunities that were available in the factories. So lots of people are going to leave their small towns and their villages, and they're going to move into larger towns, larger cities like New York City, Philadelphia, and Boston. Now, with urbanization, though, we get some very negative consequences. When we made our towns on our paper, we saw things like overcrowding, we saw pollution, and we saw just really unsafe working conditions and living conditions. Next up in the north, we have I is for immigration. The majority of the immigration in the 1800s consisted of immigrants moving to northern urban areas in order for them to find work in the factories. We'll talk more about immigrants in one of our later videos next week. T stands for telegraph, and the telegraph was invented by Samuel Morse. It uses Morse code, and it's the electronic transmission of messages along power lines from different towns around America. And so this is going to allow for instantaneous, like really fast transmission of messages. And so this would have been really beneficial if we had had it prior to the War of 1812. Maybe we would never have even fought that war, or maybe even at the end of the War of 1812 with the Battle of New Orleans. Okay? Finally, in the north, we saw the innovation of steam power. And so steam power could be for steamboats or steamships, and for the steam locomotive or the train. And remember, for steamships, I feel like we can remember this for Robert Fulton, the inventor, full steam ahead. Okay, and again, steamships, similar to railroads, this is going to help with faster transportation, and it's going to also link the east to the west. Next up, in the south, we are going to see inventions, but these are going to be more agricultural inventions instead of industrial inventions. C stands for cotton gin, and we need to know that this was invented by Eli Whitney. And ultimately, his goal in creating the cotton gin was to actually decrease slavery. He thought that if we make it easier to get the seeds out of the cotton, that many plantation owners would stop relying on slave labor to get their cotton sent to the northern factories. And unfortunately, it has the exact opposite effect. The plantation owners become very greedy, and they realize how quickly and efficiently they can create clean cotton to send to the factories, and so they make more money, and they use that money to buy more land and more slaves. Next up, we have P, which stands for plow, or the steel-tipped plow, and this was invented by John Deere, that John Deere of the green and yellow farm tool company. And the steel plow is going to be important because it's actually going to encourage people to move west. The steel-tipped plow is used by farmers to help break up the land and make it easier for farmers to plant their seeds to turn the soil over. And so if you owned a steel-tipped plow, you could move out west where the land wasn't as great as it is in the south, but you would have this tool to help you break up the harder land, and now you can buy your land cheaper and more land with this plow to help you be a successful farmer out west. Finally, for the R, we have reaper, or mechanical reaper, and this was invented by Cyrus McCormick, and this is going to help farmers to cut down their crops when it's harvest time, and it's going to help organize and sort the crops, and it's going to help reduce the amount of labor that a farmer would have to use. Ultimately, all of these innovations are going to create more efficient ways for either factory workers or farmers to do their jobs.